I'm just kidding. But no,
Take that back.
They'll root up and ruin the pasture. So the pork that great grandma did was being fed from the garden. They kept one or two, and basically it was their garbage disposal. All the scraps went to it. They were laying in hay, so it was clean. They got a little bit of grain, but not much. It really was a garbage disposal for the scraps, and that's what made the healthy lard. You can't get that today unless you raise your own. I've raised my own, and it's a job, and you have to, and I slaughter myself, and I render my own lard, and I've done all that. It's a lot of work, but that's why pork gets a bad rap. It's not that it's a bad meat. You just cannot get the grass.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, you cannot get a grass-fed version. Like grass-fed beef is actually very easy to do. It's not the same with pork. So there's not a good alternative to raise the healthy version unless you do it yourself and have a large garden.
Yeah, I remember the stories my mom's, because she lived on a farm, and most of my relatives did, of some sort of farm. But she would talk about the day that they would kill hogs, and it was a whole day affair, and they also had cows and chickens and gardens, and so it was just this harmonious, usage of resources and recycling and composting, and
you eat everything but the
everything.
Everything but the oink.
Yes, everything.
There's near my farm up in Carroll County, Eureka Springs area. There was a place called Hog Scald, and that's because that's where there was indentations in the rock, and they would use that to pour the hot water in. That's where they'd scald the hogs, and so that's how important it was. Unfortunately, that doesn't really exist anymore as far as the alternative. And if you look at wild hogs, you can get them great, but that's why you need to shoot them on sight, because they breed so rapidly.
They do.
They don't have any really natural predators, and they destroy pastures and fences. They're an invasive species.
They will chase you down.
Oh yeah, they're vicious.
The one chased my brother down, and he barely made it into the back of the truck.
Yep.
To escape that mama pig.
So it's really not a wild game. And then if it has a lot of the Russian boar in it, that's what it looks like, the Arkansas Razorback. They get a little funky tasting. It's not the same as the pork that you're used to.
Yeah. And what's the pork that we get at the Tempranillo and Basalt? That that fancy pork.
Iberian. Which and it's not. He's lying. But it's supposed to be. It's acorn fed, and so if you could. And that's what I did. Another thing with my pigs up there is that if I had a large acorn crop, I would gather up under the white oak trees and get multiple 5-gallon buckets, and they'll munch them down, and that makes them fat and makes them
taste really, really good.
And they charge a lot of money for that type of pork because it's this delicacy, and typically it's made into prosciutto and things like that.
And pork isn't supposed. They always got the other white meat. Pork is not supposed to be white.
Oh no, that's a remarketing thing.
It's supposed to be pink.
Or almost red.
Almost red.
Yeah, a good raised pig is hard to distinguish it from beef. So I'm sure they were raising it, and they noticed the meat was turning white because they're feeding it a subpar food. Mm-hmm. And some marketing genius we'll call it the other white meat. Instead of making it a negative, they turn it to a positive. Folks,
and so now everybody thinks that pork is supposed to be white.
And that's how much we've adulterated the source of it. It doesn't even look like what it's supposed to be. And they try to paint it as healthy. They're lying. Now, I still eat bacon every once in a while. I love it. Gosh, it's delicious.
I like my uncured Canadian
bacon
that I get from natural grocers.
So use pork more as a treat. I still want you to have your prosciutto ham and those type things. And guess what? Those are typically made from the highest quality pork
and you're not eating tons of it. You're eating slices of it.
And guess
it's a delicacy.
And guess what color prosciutto is? It's red.
Red.
Yeah.
Very, very red. Well, let's talk about wild game, which is something you know a great deal about. I was raised in Arkansas. My brother, my dad hunt. I remember the first time my dad took me deer hunting. It was traumatic.
Whatever.
I just couldn't handle the thought of killing something so cute. I've gotten over that now, and I hope to take down an elk one day in Colorado.
I will take you, and I will make sure you do.
So not all wild game are created equal.
No, and so a deer, the white-tailed deer, eats more like a goat. They're browsers, and that's why I do like whitetail. It's still very good.
I do not like
It's
deer at all.
a little bit different, but it takes a little bit more work, just like it does to cook a goat. It takes a little bit more work. But there are ways, typically marinating in a fruit juice,
Yes,
exposing it to a flame. Birria is a famous goat dish. It has a lot of spices to kind of
get over that gamey taste.
Correct. And so there, you have to work a little harder with that.
So wild game that grazes like cattle
Would be an elk.
tend to taste like beef.
Yes.
And that is
Your
elk and buffalo,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yeah. So they're traditional grazers, and it's a lot easier to cook them. Elk is so delicious.
That is my favorite of all time.
It's better than beef.
I love it better than beef. Yes. Yeah. I cannot wait to go back to Colorado and get some elk.
So people think that an elk's going to taste like a deer. It doesn't. Everyone's just like the vegetables. You got to eat the rainbow.
That's right.
There's every different type of meat has a different taste.
And so the wild game that do not graze like cattle, which you just said, taste gamier.
They tend to.
Yeah. And
it also depends what they eat. So the mule deer out in Colorado eat a lot of sagebrush. Mm-hmm. They taste a little more gamey. If there's a good acorn crop here in Arkansas, the deer taste a lot better because they're eating a lot of acorns.
But the deer here are eating a lot of GMO corn because everybody's got their feed plots out.
That's true.
With piles of GMO corn with their cameras, their game cameras on it. And so all the deer are just eating the GMO corn and who knows what else. If they're in the Delta, they're eating glyphosate probably.
Well, they're eating soybean. That's why.
Soybean and glyphosate and drinking contaminated water from the Mississippi.
Or the ditches.
Or the ditches with all the pesticides and stuff.
So people don't think that, they think, oh, wild game is going to be pure. Not necessarily.
You are what you eats. Mm-hmm. And you have to keep reminding yourself of that when it comes to the quality of your animal proteins.
And most people realize that the elk was a plains animal. The reason they're in the mountains now is that's their last habitat where they could escape us. But they were.
I don't blame them.
They've been reintroduced into Arkansas. So there's a herd up in the Ponca area.
Yeah, sure.
It's doing really well. Uh-huh. So the range of elk was very wide, but it got obliterated. In fact, the deer, there was a newspaper article in Eureka Springs. They reprinted it. Was from like 1905, and Farmer Jones killed a deer. It was a big story because they wiped them all out. And now, of course, they're like they're everywhere.
They're everywhere, and you have to be careful driving at night.
So it's a success story. Anyway. Wild game does not equate to always being healthier because of what they're eating and what they're exposed to. And, the ducks that go from north to south, from south to north, they're going along. The biggest flyway is the Mississippi flyway. And they are eating acorns sometimes, but a lot of times they're eating soybean and other things and rice. So it just depends on what you eats.
Right. Let's talk about dairy. So, again, your milk should come from good cows, mm-hmm. right? That are grass-fed, free of antibiotics and growth hormone, not being fed GMO grain. And personally, the pasteurization process that occurs with milk destroys a lot of the enzymes.
All of them.
All of the enzymes that help your body break down the proteins in the milk. And so you can't digest the milk very well.
Right.
And that will cause a lot of inflammation in the GI tract, and that is not good. And that's why a lot of people have problems with dairy. It's because they drink milk like, oh, this really hurts my stomach. And it could do it for other reasons too. They might be lactose intolerant as well, or they just might have any kind of dairy might be a problem for them.
Well, it depends what your genetics are.
Right.
Your Asians and your sub-Saharan Africans don't do as well with dairy because they were never raised with it. Northern Europeans, they were raised with a lot of it.
Right.
But the unpasteurized milk is a lot more digestible, but then you run the risk of how are they getting it? You have to make sure.
The person who's selling your milk, obtaining the milk, milking it from the cow, is handling it appropriately so that you don't get things like listeria. Listeria. And there are people, who are doing that. I know people who cannot drink the store-bought milk, but they tolerate the raw milk just fine.
Yeah. And it really depends. Is that your source? I mean, my mom, she was raised on because they milked their own cows. She was raised dirt poor. My mom's 93. And they kept a Jersey cow, which that's where they got their butter and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kept kind of a crossbred one that was more of a better milker. And they milked it themselves, and that was a lot of their protein source. You know, they were raised without electricity. And
did they ferment any of their milk? Do they make yogurt?
I'd have to ask Mom. I don't think they did. I think they made cheeses.
Okay. Oh, they did make cheeses.
Yeah, they made cheeses.
So they did ferment the milk into
and the enzymes and stuff. Yeah.
Cheese.
So they did that, and they butter was a very important. That's why they had a Jersey cow. It produces a lot more milk fat than other cows.
We used to eat a lot of butter, and it was so good for us.
Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, we could have a whole podcast on butter and what it does to the GO microbiome.
I'm a big fan of some butter.
The short-chain fatty acids and so many good things. But most people today should be eating fermented dairy because
I don't think should we just be downing glasses of milk? I mean, there's a lot of cultures that they're not downing milk all day long. They're primarily consuming it through yogurts and things like that, and cheeses
and kefir. Yep.
Which is very good for your digestive tract because of all those beneficial bacteria that are produced. Is very good for your gut health.
Kefir was a closely guarded secret for centuries. In fact, there was a Persian prince that was held ransom, and that was part of the ransom was they wanted the kefir grains. They didn't know what it came from, and it's a combination of bacteria and yeast that happened to form. They suspect that when they were storing it in leather skins, that somehow this became formed. And once you had the kefir grains, they're not a grain, it's just a little clump of things.
Right.
Then they reproduce rapidly, but no one knew where they came from really. And so once you had this, it was a closely guarded secret. So they captured someone and said, we'll give her back, but I want the kefir grains and a lot of gold and other stuff.
Right.
So, I mean, that's how important it was that they realized. And some of your longer lived cultures, none of them drink milk. They eat cheese or kefir or yogurt. There is no long lived, I drink, milk and then drink milk. That's just ad campaign.
Right.
Just like breakfast, the most important meal. That was General Mills came up with.
Milk does the body good.
Yeah, these are all just marketing campaigns. These are not health tips.
With your rice, your GMO fruity pebbles or whatever,
Yeah.
And so when it comes to cheeses, quality matters.
Yes.
Sargento and Kraft are barely cheese.
Yep.
And I would stay far away from that. And unfortunately, in your grocery stores like Kroger or what have you, there's huge selections of all these poor quality cheeses. They finally got some in the deli that are probably better.
Yeah, there's some good ones. Yeah,
there's some good ones there. But the packaged stuff is just a no-go for me. It's horrible. Stay away from it. It's just going to cause your gut a lot of inflammation.
Your goat and sheep cheeses tend to be better. Unfortunately, most of the feta is not feta. There are, like Murray makes a brand.
Because feta is supposed to be from a sheep.
Yep. And the process they make, it makes it very nutritious.
I love it.
But the crumbles, that's not feta. That's just an imitation. And so you really have to know your sources. But the feta comes in a brine. It's made from sheep. Mm-hmm. It's delicious. And I get it quite often for us. Your aged cheddars from Wisconsin, there's some excellent ones there. But a lot of people they will tolerate goat and sheep cheeses better than the other cheeses. That has to do with the type of casein, and it makes it more digestible. The A2 casein is a little bit more digestible.
Right.
When we switched to the Holstein cow, that's an A1 casein, and our bodies were used to A2, and we made an abrupt change. And that the Holstein produces so much more milk that everyone adopted that because you get 3 times.
Right.
Like I said, my mom kept a Jersey cow and a conglomerate that had Holstein in it. One was for milk, one was for the butter and the milk fat. But they always would sneak the milk from the Jersey cow because it tasted better. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on those type factors.
There's a lot. It can be complicated.
So right now, just choose your better cheeses, like the older
aged
cheeses,
if you can tolerate them. Some people cannot tolerate cheeses for different reasons, whether it's the histamine
mm-hmm.
content
or the casein
or the certain proteins in there that just does not agree with their body. Some people just do not do with dairy at all, do well with dairy at all.
Yeah.
And so
when we do our elimination reintroduction diets, you don't give them a glass of milk to down to see if they're allergic to dairy.
right.
You start with fermented items. You might
And we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, those type things.
And so, and then a thing about yogurt, there's, since gut health is all the rage, everybody's either taking probiotics or eating a lot of yogurt. And I'm glad people are eating yogurt, but again, it's a quality issue. Most of the yogurts that you find in the shelves are just very poor quality. There's a lot of gums and fillers. They're high in sugar.
And most of them are made from cows that are being fed GMO corn.
Exactly.
So you need to find grass-fed yogurt.
Yep.
Grass-fed cheeses. Same thing applies to butter, applies to your cheeses and your yogurts and your kefir. So it all comes with, what there is a source.
There are other dairy alternative yogurts like coconut yogurt, which is often high in sugar.
And still high in histamine.
And it still can be high in histamine too. I actually had some the other day and I had a histamine response to it. My heart rate shot up. I got flushed, felt nauseated. And I was like, what? I was like, oh, I just had some coconut yogurt.
Mm-hmm.
Bet that's what caused it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it for the animal.
Well, a few other I want to go over real quick.
You got some other ones?
Yeah. Organ meats.
Oh, yes.
So,
sorry, thank you.
And again, it still has to come from an animal that's being sourced correctly, the grass-fed.
Because that liver
is the most nutritionally dense.
But it can also be one of the most toxic parts of the animal because of the job that it does with detoxification.
But so if you can get a liver from a well-raised grass-fed animal, it's highly nutritious. Sweetbreads is a delicacy. Heart, pancreas, the heart and lungs and stuff, that's getting kind of, my mom used to eat it, but it's, that they still are very nutrient dense, but liver is really what we're talking about.
I can eat liver in small amounts. It does have a very strong taste, but liver and onions is pretty darn good.
And I like tacos lengua.
Yes, you do.
Which is the beef tongue. Mm-hmm. It's delicious.
You will eat literally anything.
I do. I'm a garbage disposal. Collagen and bone broth. So your collagens are great for your skin. That's what gives your skin elasticity.
And where does the collagen come from, Paul?
The bones and the knuckles and the joints.
Right.
So people try to make bone broth. They don't understand. You can't just put just a bone in there. If it doesn't have the marrow inside, if it doesn't have the cartilage on the sides, that's what makes for the good bone broth. You can tell a good bone broth because it'll gel. Mm-hmm. There's some other reasons. If you cook it too fast,
He's excellent at making bone broth. And we used to make it for our patients.
Yes.
And he stopped and they basically protested.
But it took me, there was a 3-day period.
It was a 3-day process.
Each month, I had to rent the kitchen and it just was such an ordeal. And I'd make hundreds of gallons, but we go through it quickly.
But I remember one lady, she was like, my skin is glowing and it just looks radiant and it's your bone broth and I need it. And you have to make it again.
In my bone broth also, I did a lot of vegetables to give it
flavor,
but also just more nutrients. So there was
It was delicious. And it had that thick gel and just shook like jelly.
Yeah.
That was some good stuff.
The secret to that, folks, is not to, even if you have good bones, if you boil it too much, it'll break those protein chains down and it won't gel. Still very nutritious.
There's a science to it.
Yeah, but if you like the gel, then you have to cook it low and slow. Beef takes about 48 hours. I like doing chicken for about 12 to 24 hours. With chicken, you have to use the feet, which is harder to find, but I had chicken feet in mine.
I remember seeing chicken feet in the freezer. I was like,
but that's where the cartilage comes from.
I know. It was just kind of weird for me. That's all.
But I will say, as we say, every superfood has a downside. Even bone broth does, because of, and this is more of a sleep issue and excitatory with the GABA receptors, but the glutamine and the glycine
can be excitatory for some people and make them very anxious when they eat it.
You got to still listen to your body. It depends on where you are if you're stressed or not. So if you're highly stressed, even though it'd be very good for you, because nothing's better for your gut than bone broth. Exactly. It is so good for your gut, but
it can backfire on some
people. It can backfire. Everything can backfire.
Exactly. We're all different. We're all very, very different.
People always ask you, what's the perfect diet? We say, we don't know yet. We have to find it because everyone has their own diet.
Right. And it can change.
With age and
with
stress.
age and different times in your life, your needs can differ. And sometimes, like if you have certain types of bacterial imbalances in your gut, you can't eat certain foods for a little bit. It's like, for instance, if you have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, certain vegetables and fruits and things may not be, or not going to be your best friend. And so you're going to have to back off on those until that imbalance corrects itself, and then you can slowly add those foods back in. And gut dysbiosis and imbalances in the gut occur for many different reasons, and we'll talk about that on the podcast about the GI microbiome.
I did want to go back to animal proteins. Plant proteins. A few things.
And we were going to talk about that next.
Okay, that was a good segue then.
Yeah, awesome. So plant-based proteins. The whole plant-based veganism. It's just
that's nice. Okay, first of all, the Impossible Burgers and all that is highly processed. The list of ingredients is crazy. So you're thinking, oh, I'm eating plants, it's healthy, and everyone's like,
it's coming from a plant.
Yes, but
that's manufacturing a bunch of horrible stuff.
They're starting with a GMO plant,
right?
Typically, they're using a lot of grains. And then they're adding all kinds of things to make it taste like meat.
Why? And if you want it to taste like meat, why not just eat the meat?
Exactly. I lived in India a year and a half. I was working for General Electric at the time. I was the country manager there. And the vegetarian food there is excellent. Mm-hmm. Not once they try to make it taste like meat. It's vegetarian for the sake of being vegetarian.
Right.
There are no vegan cultures, folks. There are vegetarian cultures. India is one of them, but most of them are ovo-lacto, where they're eating eggs and dairy. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot easier to get your nutrients that way. There is no vegan society. So people are like, vegan's the way to go. It's the best. They're our toughest pages to help.
And they are some of my sickest.
Yep. But I'm just telling you, there's never been in the history of the world a vegan society.
Primarily because the vegans are eating a lot of more processed foods, and they're simply not getting the nutrients they need to function like they should. There are certain nutrients that you're just going to be deficient in on a vegan diet. Mm-hmm. Zinc is one of them. It's just hard to get. You're not going to get it in plants.
Right.
And there, of course, plants have a lot of anti-nutrients in them, especially if you don't, prepare them appropriately.
And I'll go over that.
And they bind up a lot of nutrients. And there's just a whole lot of reasons where you should choose not to do that.
So let's go over the plant-based proteins that are good, because like you said, the anti-nutrients are because of the lectins and the phytic acid and things like that. Now, folks, I'll go over that in our
and we do have a podcast on how to deal with preparing these
ancestral type preparation. But tofu is a good example of a item that is done correctly.
It's fermented.
It can be exactly. It is a fermented soybean. In fact,
needs to be non-GMO.
It has to be non-GMO, which is hard to find. But if you get a non-GMO tofu, it is a protein that can be incorporated into your meals.
I like tofu.
And it's very inexpensive.
Mm-hmm. You make some excellent tofu.
Well,
when you bake it and you put all your little magic on it with your spices and stuff, it is delicious.
It takes work. You have to, it takes love. I worked in a vegetarian kitchen in Aspen. And so I learned a lot of the tricks to make that. Tempeh is another fermented, that's from like the Indonesia area. Right. It's fermented, again, soy. That they also did some things that were completely wrong. Seitan is just gluten. So we know that gluten's not great now for a lot of people. And that's what they were eating, was basically straight gluten. And the amount of energy it takes to cook some of these vegan dishes is out. They say it's sustainable, going to save the world, but no. By the time you get it to where it needs to be, and it takes so much cooking process.
And you have to eat a lot of it.
You have to eat a lot of it. So it's not the same as a grass-fed beef and throw it on the grill and it's done. That's a lot.
And it doesn't fill you up. You just, I was a vegetarian. I tried that when I was in college, because it was all the rage. And I was always hungry.
Well,
never felt full.
One of my friends, he'd always come in for meals, and
I was bloated.
He was a good athlete, and he was eating 2, 3 times what I would expect someone to do, because he was needing it. He ended up getting diabetes, not related to this, but for other reasons. And he went back to meat because it was so much easier and he felt so much better. He ate healthy meats,
Right.
but he went the vegan route for a long time and then came back because when his health crashed, that's what he did. Sorry, folks. I know it's a tough pill to swallow, but that's the truth.
I've never met a vegan or never met a vegan or vegetarian who went animal protein and regretted it.
No.
I've not met one yet.
I got to tell that 140 story. So when I worked at the restaurant in Aspen,
Paul. Okay.
the owner of the restaurant had 2 Malamutes and they were vegan, bless their hearts. And
this is just sad.
But I got where I didn't like the food, and the dishwasher was Costa Rican, and she taught me how to make pupusas. So I'd send her to the store to get some pork.
What's a pupusa?
It is a small flat corn. I'm not going to call it tortilla, but the meat's inside.
Right.
It's a Costa Rican. Mm-hmm. It's delicious, but it's meat inside of corn maize, and it's fried on the skillet.
It's delicious.
But these dogs would smell that pork, and the lady would have killed me. She would have thrown out every pot in the place if she knew I had cooked meat in her kitchen. But the Malamutes, I started feeding them the pork and beef and things. And she started commenting one day, like, my dog, you must have the best dog karma. My dogs love you. They follow you everywhere.
The dog whisperer.
The dog whisperer was feeding them meat.
Bless their hearts. They were loving you for it.
And they're, bless their hearts, they're Malamutes, the closest thing to a wolf. And and she just was ill-informed. She had health issues and she thought it was going to save her. And
I know.
It didn't.
And
she was a nice lady.
It seems like a lot of people that have health issues, they go straight for
extremes,
vegetarianism or veganism.
Or sometimes go all the carnivore.
Yeah, or straight carnivore. And it's like we are attributing a lot of modern diseases today to old-fashioned foods. And it makes no sense.
Yeah.
So we need to start just using some critical thinking and know your history and just think about these things for a bit.
Right.
So
there are some good plant-based proteins. They're fermented. Work them in. Stay away from the highly processed Impossible Burger and things like that. Anything that's vegetarian that's trying to look like meat, stay away from it.
Right.
If you want to eat a vegetarian dish, be like the Indians and make it taste beautiful.
We do that sometimes where we just have a plate full of vegetables.
Well, and when I was in India, I was vegetarian.
We do have a little bit of feta cheese and things like that too.
I was ovo-lacto when I was in India because the meats were not high quality, so I just stayed away from them. Of course, beef is not very popular because of the Hindus.
Right.
But some of them do eat chicken and fish. And I guess near the end, I started incorporating fish. But there was a long period of time when I was ovo-lacto, meaning eggs and dairy. And that is a reasonable diet. Mm-hmm. And the Indians are a healthy, excluding all the toxins from the pollution and all that. But, that is a healthy diet.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's all bad. Just eat ancestrally. Who's done it before? Does it make sense?
What have we been doing? What have humans been consuming?
Yep.
And how have they been preparing it? And it certainly is not what we're doing today.
Of all the blue zones, which are the people who have populations that have the most centurions, over 100, none of them are vegetarians except for the ones in Loma Linda, California, which is the Seventh-day Adventist. And even most of those are pescatarians.
Or they're eating fish.
Yeah. So.
And probably very high quality fish as they're in California on the coast.
Yeah. So they do everything else right as these other places. That's why we're talking about the fundamentals. All the blue zones do the fundamentals. They're not doing crazy protocols or supplements. Right. They're just doing the fundamentals.
Yeah. So the bottom line is this. Eat adequate animal protein. It's very satiating. It sticks with you for a long time, especially during this whole plant-based diet push. A lot of my patients, female patients especially, they're always trying to lose weight, and you ask them what they're eating. They're just eating a bunch of vegetables and salads and very little animal protein. And you're like, what are you doing? I need you to start eating more animal protein. And as soon as they do that, they're like, I finally feel full. Mm-hmm. And I'm not wanting to eat all of the time. I'm like, exactly. So in my professional opinion, people do better with a higher intake of high quality animal protein in their diets. My vegan patients are some of my sickest.
Mm-hmm.
They just are, and it's very difficult to change that mindset.
And vegans different than vegetarian folks,
right? And you know, I do have patients who seem to thrive on more vegetables, less animal protein. Everybody's different. You just got to find what works for you. And then higher intakes of high quality animal protein often help with maintaining appropriate body weights. They improve blood sugar and insulin levels, primarily because you're replacing a bunch of carbs with animal protein. They help improve detoxification because they're providing that high bioavailable amino acids that your body needs to detoxify. They help with hormonal balance, mental well-being, and can certainly assist with increasing muscle mass. Mm-hmm. If you're not eating enough protein, it's hard to build that muscle mass that if you're trying to. People with intolerances to meat, especially beef, lots of times it can be because of not enough stomach acid, we find. And that can be corrected. And once you do that, people seem to start tolerating meat again. Of course, there is something called an alpha-gal allergy, which is
you'll know that it's severe,
which is an allergy to mammalian proteins, primarily beef and pork.
It comes from a tick bite.
And you'll eat beef or pork or what have you, and several hours later, your heart will be going crazy and itchy, and you feel panicky. And
it's different than indigestion.
Yeah, very, very. You will know, and even some of these people can't even touch leather. They're so sensitive. But when you reduce their inflammation levels, sometimes they're able to start tolerating it again. It's a very weird allergy, and I think probably more prevalent than we realize. People just don't know they have it,
right?
And we've had to test people for it.
There's different, like I said, there's different levels.
And it's a spectrum, and then remember that quality is everything. With plants, with vegetables, fruits, and with animal products, quality is everything. You are what you eat eats.
Yep. And just like plants, eat the rainbow. But the meat has rainbows also. You have orange salmon, red salmon, red meat, white chicken.
Yeah, variety.
Yep, variety is good because they all have different attributes that are good.
Yeah.
You even use a carnivore diet for a handful of your patients who have extreme GI issues because they...
Yeah, a lot of people with like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, if you just give them a break from a lot of vegetables and things and put them on... I have a lot of people I know and communities online that I've discussed this with. They basically cured their Crohn's and ulcerative colitis by going more carnivore and staying away from the vegetables. It just did not work for them for whatever reason, but it just made their symptoms go away.
But that's an exception.
And they seem to be doing fine.
It's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah,
it's not the panacea of health. We're not saying to go that route, but it is just an example of we've never cured anyone with Crohn's disease by putting on a vegetarian diet.
No, we have not.
So
I haven't.
No.
All right. So that is there anything else you want to add? I think we've done a pretty good job of covering everything we wanted to. Of course, this is a huge topic, and you could talk, ad nauseum about this topic, but we wanted to hit the highlights. That's what we're trying to do here. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And again, you are what you eat.
Bye.
I don't take nothing that a doctor don't prescribe. I don't do no drugs, man. I don't do no drugs, man.